December 14th. Guns! That means 10 o'clock. Wilson is arriving at the little station in the Avenue du Bois. More guns! He is embracing Monsieur Clemenceau and Monsieur Poincaré. More guns! He is starting to drive down the Champs-Élysées through the soldiers and the enormous crowds and the flags. How can I bear to be here? Scarcely a patch of white cloud on the blue garden sky. The hospital feels lonely and deserted, as on Armistice Day. I sent Miss O to try to see the president. I miss her awfully. I wish she would hurry and get back. At least the postman goes his rounds. Louise, the concierge, whose rotund, competent countenance now sometimes appears at my door, brings a letter from Rick. Raging and champing at Brest, waiting for a transport, to describe yesterday's landing. He saw it from the dockside where he got a military job for that purpose, and writes of salutes, of Breton peasants by the thousands, silent, not very interested save when a bit drunk, of German prisoners throwing down their work to run and stare across the dirty water at the man in the silk hat and fine clothes who is so greatly to influence their destiny. The president himself very fine. I wondered just what thrill he had seeing his ugly army men, long straight lines of them down every street, Americans being the ugliest race on earth, but a great lot, a great wonderful lot. He was stirred, obviously. I did not think it possible to show such emotion as he showed, such a fine restraint and dignity. His silk hat, waved only slightly, was more moving and more moved than a whole body's gesture of a Bernhardt. Was he seeing the French as well, or only us? Us, I am certain, just as I could hear his wife's trite comments on the quaint Breton cap. We've been dancing, the peasants and some drunken quartermasters, on the bandstand in the square. Now Place President Wilson, all evening. Even Brest, whole that it is gay. Peasants in gorgeous galas still parade the streets in automobiles, passing the hat as they go, alas, in honor of the president. My nurse is here, breathless and dazed and happy to have been squashed in the crowd and trampled on by soldiers. She managed to rent a stool for a large sum from one of the profiteers and saw the president smile. Everyone is talking of his smile, as if the poor man had been expected to weep. But Paris is so little given to heroics, so prompt to ridicule the least pompousness in a celebrity, that Wilson's bearing must have been perfect to arouse this extraordinary enthusiasm. A visit from Lippmann, Mertz, R. Hayes, just at supper time. They were in hilarious spirits, laughing at my efforts to eat my dull meal, and also swallow the far more important gist of their remarks. W.L. fairly uplifted. He says the popular feeling came incredibly out of the depths, that Wilson seemed to meet it just as it was given, as if he did realize it was not offered to him as a man, but to the ideas for which he stands, to the promise of reorganization for the poor old European world. The day has been strangely mild and sweet, something like a breath of spring coming in the night windows still. France was the first to say in 1914, "We are making the war against war." They'd practically stopped believing it, but now there are thousands of people in Paris tonight who almost again believe the war has been fought for something bigger than national preservation. December 16th. The press continues to jubilate over Wilson and he to be feted in the streets. But I have heard one dissenting voice at last, and that in an unexpected quarter, Tom's. He came out late this afternoon to bring me a book and said that the president's hash was settled for him. No, he hadn't seen any of the festivities, hadn't scornfully cared to, but happened to be in ours, on the Rue de Rivoli, when Wilson went by, from the Hôtel de Ville. He was kissing his gloved hand to the crowds. "A terrible omen," said Tom, with a disgusted laugh and a critical glance at it, as if divining my query at his skepticism. He reminded me of the summer evening during the air raid period, when we had explored the working-class region beyond the Place de la Nation. Every house, every shop, was closed and empty in the quarters of the well-to-do. who had fled to safer regions. But here life seethed and teemed, unquenchable and voluble and unafraid, men, women, and children thronging everywhere, bistros full of gesticulating customers, family groups seated on the sidewalks. In one street, badly hit by a raid 2 nights earlier, a friendly baker indicated a warehouse burnt down, 3 houses smashed in, a wall under which 7 people were crushed, a sidewalk from which they had to dig a woman, embedded like a fly in amber. Yet only one local shop had closed up, and some wit, voicing the general sense of mankind, had written on the shutters in chalk, "Fermé par cause de la frousse." In similar American argot, "He got cold feet." "Fermé par cause de la frousse." Tom chuckled again at the recollection. If the Germans had marched into Paris, these were the only Parisians who wouldn't have budged. And now it was these people who were the great backers of Wilson against powers and potentates they completely mistrusted. Let the president beware of kid-glove sentiment. Let him beware of giving a sign of la rousse, timidity. Tom is desperately restless and abstracted, just as much so as Rick was, really, and wants more than ever to get away from the Paris which, he says, is losing its wistful, wartime charm without regaining its peacetime glamour. You can no longer see the town from end to end one doting glance, as last summer when it was empty as Pisa, because a hybrid mass of foreigners obstruct the vistas. Turks in turbans on the steps of the Madeleine, generals of every hue and nation, and worse, smooth, opulent, possessive elderly civilians with decorations in their buttonholes who wave bunches of 20-franc notes like so many carrots before the noses of the already balky taxi drivers. Hard to hold down a job. Where do you want to go? Russia, Germany, any old revolutionary place. Life here is too much like a book. Interesting, but unreal. And it'll be more and more so when the diplomats get going. You'll see, the peace conference will be true to the form of all peace conferences. I want to get into the mess itself. Up to the ears. I want to wander over the face of Europe for about 15 years. That might be enough. He has forgotten all about his listener now, and his keen, sandy gaze is far away. What interests me is just simply the world, the divers ways in which men live, produce, eat, think, play, and create. That's where everything leads you. New Republic, politics, problem of Middle Europe, science of economics. I want a big job to tackle. There ought to be some for a young man, especially if the old order is gone. Well, I'll be sure to tell you whether it is or not," he added with a smile and a flash of mending spirits. "We're not going to let you miss anything just because you have a few broken bones." Tom has been a great support through the thick and thin of War Paris. I shall miss him badly. His warm human curiosity, his almost novelist sense for life, his frankness and his irony. He is changing. Something steely and detached is replacing his boyish faiths. Yet I trust his intelligence and his heart. His personal reactions are somehow involved with the bedrock of the universe. As the universe is now disrupted, he has to go and look down the cracks. Of course, all the more that, through no fault of his own, he missed the great experience of the war, the fighting. Though he doesn't believe in war as a solution for the world's troubles, and knows he has, in his Humane Food Office, been more closely in touch with its issues, trade, economic balance in Europe, than our common friend Rick, floating high over no man's land, he still feels a little cheated, a little reproached by his immunity from danger. He needs to get into the mess. Hoover ought to manage it. December 19th. The King of Italy is now being welcomed, in a dismal rain, with, the femme de ménage assures me, a very skimpy number of salutes. She listened jealously as they were going off, concerned for America's honor, and nodded with satisfaction when it was over. Wilson wins. December 20th. This morning she hastened to report the opinion of her daughter, the postal clerk, who went to the station to see the king arrive. Most inferior exhibition. Only 1 row of soldiers. Je t'assure, maman, qu'elle m'a dit c'était quelconque Il n'y avait pas de haie. I tell you, Mom, she told me it was nothing, not even 2 files. My eyes turn only in 2 directions today, towards a pair of crutches standing in the corner, towards the window which reveals lame doughboys walloping along the garden paths as if crutches were no possible impediment. I shall be leaving the hospital soon, after all. Cessation from pain is a very positive emotion. The psychology of the New Testament miracles is sound. The God who restores you to these common functions, usually so unthankfully taken for granted, of sight, hearing, locomotion, is really the Savior of the world. This is what gives doctors their position of almost divine arbitration. There is nothing I would not do for mine, or my nurse, so patient and so homesick as Christmas approaches. She read me a letter from the Dakota farm today about the fall butchering. Joffre was yesterday received into the French Academy, and M's account of it, and the report of his speech in the débat, has set the Franco-American chord to twanging, clear and far, all the way to Boston Common, where I first saw the bluff, serene old soldier, who in so many ways recalls our own Grant, lifted on the tide of America's violent devotion to France. How remote that exalted spring of 1917 already feels. It seemed to the American people that by sheer force of love they would instantly accomplish something great and comforting for the relief of the Allied armies. In French the prose has the noblest classic ring, and they were right. This love was to allow France, overwhelmed by the hard trials of the spring of 1917, to keep her confidence and her courage intact. It used to seem to me, a year ago, when the early detachments of the AEF and the ARC were arriving in France, that the 2 countries were exactly in the position of 2 lovers who had become engaged by correspondence and were meeting for the first time in the flesh. Feelings were brimming over, but fashions of dressing and conducting the business of life were mutually strange and disconcerting. Theoretically, the French themselves desired to be converted to the new American fashion. Our confident youth, our fertility of invention, our vast material prosperity, our efficiency, and our scientific method became as lyric a theme as Wilsonianism is now. But let us hope some lover of the comédie humaine, human comedy, made notes of the actual encounter between the French manufacturer, who pointed with pride to a factory unchanged since his grandfather's day, and the American capitalist, who asked when he was going to tear it down. Between the New York businessman, accustomed in 5 minutes telephone conversation to start a train of events to culminate within a week, and the French administrative official, who had not abandoned his habit of longhand letters, long, polite conversations, and long-deferred decisions. Between the French peasant, who made his toilet in the barnyard, kept his gold in a stocking, and lived frugally on vegetable soup in a house inherited from a revolutionary ancestor, and the sergeant from Ohio, with a checkbook in his pocket, brought up in an apartment on enameled bathtubs and beefsteak. Between the poilu, with his pinard, and his resignation, and his pay of 5 sous a day, and the American private, who found his dollars scarcely sufficient to storm the biggest town near his camp on a Saturday night, and drive French colonels from their accustomed chairs to make way for his fizzing champagne. The question is, as the conference draws near, how much understanding have we achieved through these various contacts and trials? How much even by dying side by side? The first outburst of love between America and France, as Joffre recalls, brought us into war. The second, whose magnetic waves have been radiating from Wilson's smile into the remotest French countryside, is to bring us into peace. But when it comes to the application of Wilson's doctrine, such cheerful remarks as Monsieur Gauvain's in the débat leave one gasping. The better we know him, the more do we realize that his mind, though different in formation from ours, is close to ours. There is reason to hope that our methods, apparently divergent, will adjust themselves to our common purposes. Christmas night. If I were Amy Lowell, I should write a free verse poem about Christmas Day in the American hospital. All pictures. Little French nurses flitting in and out like pigeons on blue wing. Heureux Noël! Dakota sails more leisurely, plump and white and starched, from mistletoe to holly. Roses and mimosa and heaps of ribboned bundles. A pair of silver earrings, and crutches in the corner. Now for it, says the head nurse. She stands by, a little mocking, critical, and earnest. Now for it. Can I? Good. A bit wobbly. Get her foot up again. The cast weighs 1,000 pounds. 1,000,000 fierce prickles run up my leg like ants, and bite and seethe and bicker in a red-hot ankle. The doctor makes a fine salute, and eyes the Christmas bottle. Vieux Mac, with a doggerel Christmas rhyme about its neck. He listens till his eyes grow moist, grabs it, and hurries out. Merry Christmas and cheers from Brest, now and forever, apparently. God damn. Classic voice of the AEF. Merry Christmas from Dijon, and Ernest, in an equally loud Western voice that fills my room to brimming. Flowers, chocolates, and enormous boots, stowed anywhere at all. Christmas dinner sits lightly on a tray. Take half my turkey, all my plum pudding. Nothing fills him up. His eyes stay hungry. I miss them too, horribly. Let's talk about Nancy. But visitors come streaming in with sherry and cigarettes and chocolates. Encore de chocolat? More chocolate? Comments the little chasseur with a scorn. Will President Wilson feed it to the Germans? The door ajar on Christmas plants, set in a row. Holly rustling. Doughboys snoring in their tents, under their comfort bags. My mood flows out to meet and share their dreams of home. On into Paris, on and on to the confines of the earth, and then still on, drawing strength and goodness from some bottomless world reservoir. December 30th. I am beginning to be worried by Wilson's apparent unawareness of the complete divergence between his views and those of Clemenceau. Is it unawareness or deliberate ignoring? The President told our troops on Christmas Day that he did not find in the hearts of the great leaders with whom he was associated any difference of principle or fundamental purpose. And now that he is in London, feted and adored and acclaimed again, he seems to have mounted, above the Guildhall, to the crest of a still rosier cloud, whence he waves his silk hat and speaks even more nebulous humanities. It is a strange thing to see Clemenceau craning a stiff neck to this cloud, from the firm soil of La Patrie, and responding with chiseled particularities. The dialogue may be thus abridged from the morning papers. Wilson. Our soldiers fought to do away with the old order and establish a new one, which will bring honor and justice to the world. Clemenceau. For most ancient times, peoples have rushed at one another's throats to satisfy appetites or interests. Wilson. The center of the old order was the balance of power, maintained by jealous watchfulness. We must now have not one group set against another, but a single overwhelming group of nations, trustees of the peace of the world. Clemenceau. There was an old system, which appears to be condemned today by wry high authorities, but to which I am not ashamed to say I remain partially faithful. The balance of power. The guiding principle of the conference is that nothing should happen, after the war, to break up the alliance of the four powers which together won the victory. Wilson. The foundations are laid. We have accepted the same great body of principles. Their application should afford no fundamental difficulty. Clemenceau. With old materials you cannot build a new edifice. America is far from the German frontier. Never shall I cease to have my gaze fixed on the immediate satisfaction of the claims to which France is entitled. Wilson. It was this incomparably great object that brought me overseas, to lend my counsel to this great, may I not say final, enterprise of humanity. Clemenceau. I may make mistakes, but I can say, without self-flattery, that I am a patriot. France is in an especially difficult situation. La question de la paix est une question terrible. The question of peace is a terrible question. What is France to this powerful, little old skeptic? An ancient, intricate, delicately adjusted toy that he holds in his wrinkled hands? rather a mistress whom he clutches to his passionate old heart. His accent when he speaks of her, again and again through this speech in the Chambre, House of Commons, makes Wilson seem, by comparison, to be holding humanity at arm's length. There is a rumor that Lloyd George has won a complete victory for England against the 14 points on the question of freedom of the seas, and the Ebert government is tottering. January 1st, 1919. The spirit of the newborn year of victory is a very unrestful one in Paris. Many friends, some I had not seen for a long while, turned up to wish me well. All, whether men or women, soldiers or civilians, preparing to rush to the ends of the earth, to Germany, the Balkans, Syria. The USA is the rarest of their destinations. The cumulative effect is that some cog that fixed their rightful place in the scheme of things has slipped. It is the same impression I had at the time of the armistice intensified. Humanity, especially American humanity, cast adrift into space. They all seem hurtling through universal emptiness, their one directing thought to get somewhere else, to arrive where a new kind of adventure flourishes, where life is again a highly spiced dish, where they can prolong the war or, better, forget that it is over. Of course, I exaggerate. I am so vowed to endurance and so rooted in the Rue Chauveau that all this uneasy movement is disturbing. My own longing is to get out of hospital, home to the United States, away from Europe, from disintegrated people, back to familiar, quiet faces and a desk by a window on a land that has not known war. But the war doesn't happen to be over for me with the new year, any more than it was with the armistice. Dr. M. now admits that he has been deceiving me about dates. I have got to stay right here for, well, Miss Bullard frankly says, for 3 or 4 months. She, at least, knows I can stand the truth, and told me the French surgeon's view that I shall always have a stiff ankle. Miss Bullard's tents are finally closed, and she is on her way home. It was wonderful to see her, and hear news of the blessés, but rather heartbreaking. The almost fourth-dimensional sense of power and service which sustained such women is gone. They are physically and nervously drained to the dregs. Yet they don't dare to stop and rest. That means reflection. Tom's departure to Belgrade was a more cheerful thing to witness. He came to say goodbye, for though he seems somewhat shell-shocked, like everybody else, the pinnacle of life is still before him. War, to him, was not the pinnacle, whereas the nurse feels, as the aviator did, that she can never again find such a peak as she has climbed in the last years. A curious phenomenon I have been noting in the American men, those under 40, even if ready to go home, almost universally wish to find new jobs. The ones they had before the war were, they say, unsatisfactory. Now is the time to change. Often they propose to seek not only new occupations, but new American habitats. This is so marked a masculine reaction that I was surprised when my old English friend F.E., who for 4 years has been an ordnance officer in Flanders, and turned up delightfully on leave, told me he was going back to the cotton business. British phlegm? Perhaps not, as the business is now in Egypt. The doctor came in to see me this evening, the picture of desolation, all the lines of his face slanting down instead of up. It does not do for a man of the beau vivant, gather ye roses temper, to look either backward or forward at the new year, especially after the shades of 40 have closed in. The present is the only safe ground, and when it fails under the feet, as Paris is about to fail for Dr. M., why is it that humorists and storytellers, whose particular gift is to make others laugh, have so underlying a sadness? And why are cynics so sentimental? Tonight the doctor was unhappy because he hadn't written to his mother, hadn't and couldn't. He tells me that all at once during the war, after prolific letter writing, he ceased to be able to set down a line. He is rather proud of his queer inhibition, but also oppressed by self-reproach towards his southern friends, and especially towards this dear old lady, whom he thinks the most charming woman in the world. She sounds like my grandmother, with an aroma of the Waverley novels about her. He finally cheered up, tucked himself into the chaise longue under a steamer rug, as if for a sea voyage, and launched forth into a variegated version, by no means a Walter Scott version, of his past romantic adventures. I told him that if he weren't more careful, I should be writing his autobiography. Deliver me, O God of battles, from pity for other people or myself. That is the best New Year's prayer I can formulate. The men who were killed do not want our pity or need it. They gave their lives so eagerly and freely, the first of them, so awarely and impersonally, the last of them, clear-eyed young figures like Stuart, that we are unworthy of them if we offer it. And surely the survivors are not to be pitied, but envied for their chance to put a great experience to lifelong use. The way we shall measure warriors and war workers in the future, I am sure, is by their ability to get away from the war, to make it merely the foundation of a new existence. The ones who live constantly in memory of it will be the same feudal type of human creature who is always harking back to golden college years. If only I could go home. The Paris scene has suddenly lost the brightness which Wilson's coming brought. It is murky and confused and haunted, and the ghostly voices that wail over the city tonight offer an ominous welcome to 1919. January 2nd. A new world has dawned for me. The hospital outside my room. I've been practicing in my own small domain, and today had the terrific adventure of walking on crutches down the long, slippery corridor, assisted by my anxious Miss O, while the whole surgical and nursing force gathered to applaud and jeer. Dr. M is a terror on these occasions, sends the nurses into hysterics, and goads the patient to unparalleled effort. Exactly what he wants. Even Simon, the husband of the concierge, a sloping-shouldered, chipper little Frenchman in blue jeans, took his place in the group, and with that instinct for hard fact that never fails the French workman, said, "Allez, mademoiselle, go on, miss. When spring comes, you'll see how your luck will turn." When spring comes. I wanted to hear, "You'll be leaving us next week." The corridor is narrow and dark, and I turned the corner into a very bright gallery which is entirely glass, opening on the garden. There stands the white table of the floor nurse, with her records. There stand a few inviting wicker chairs, into one of which I was assisted, with trembling knees. And there, above all, on a white bed that seems to grow out of banks of flowers, with a big blue bow on her bobbed black hair, and the vividest of dark eyes, lies one of the most charming young French girls I have ever seen. My nurse has been telling me much about Mademoiselle V, how she has been in the hospital since May, that is some 8 months, under the care of the Red Cross, with an abscess of the lung due to careless throat treatment in a hospital when she was nursing our soldiers. How she is quite alone in the world, deserted by her French family because she refused to marry the young man of their choice. How she is the enfant gâté, spoiled baby of the American hospital, the friend of the little nurses, the darling of the doctor, the doughboy's delight. How she is often in pain and feverish, how she sometimes cries, how she may never recover, but is intensely social, and manages to stop everyone on the way to the rooms beyond. Nurses, doctors, visitors, caught by her perfume as bees are attracted by a flower, forced by her sweetness to give her attention and kindness and gifts and news of the world. So, of course, she knew about the wounded American woman. She had heard the rumpus stirred by Dr. M and was waiting eagerly for me to appear. When I had drunk Miss O's sherry, I was helped to a seat beside her, and we had a little talk. About New Orleans, where she was brought up, that may account for her revolt from French family tradition, and France, where she was born. She came back just before the war, and doesn't know which country she loves better. She speaks with great vivacity, with the prettiest gestures of her plump and rounded arms, while the curves of her cheeks flush red out of a skin warm as a white pearl. She radiates health, one would say, something supremely good and sane as well as supremely alluring. But over her pillow hovers a shadow. Where had I seen that shadow before? Fate, disaster, I last saw it over the heads of the young soldiers. How blind to suppose that the end of the war had placed timeless youth beyond the reach of that dark wing. As I got up to start laboriously homeward, I caught sight, through a glass partition into an adjoining room, of an old man in bed. A bald, shiny head with a few sprigs of white hair, a face hollowed like a skull with its chin bound in bandages. Miss O replied to my question that he is a Welshman, she thinks, and a professional jockey, dying of cancer of the face, and added in lurid detail what it was like to do his dressings and feed him. The nurses involuntarily turned away. He smiled at them, even so, and mumbled thanks. No war wound could be more horrible, and he gets, I suspect, none of the moral consolations of the wounded. There wasn't a flower in his room. Miss O says his only visitor is an old wife, who comes rarely, from a distance. I have been thinking too long in terms of the wounded. In every civil hospital in the world, youth and age must be dying of incurable and ugly disease, with but a glass between them. If we knew or cared. My room looks entirely different now I am back, small and cramped and picane, and no longer peaceful since the door fails to shut out the rest of the hospital. Everything I had seen trailed in after me, seated itself like a hobgoblin on my pillow, and gibbered when I tried to hide my head under the bedclothes. January 8th. Reconstruction is a miserable business. The reality of learning to walk all over again on two imperfect legs has brought my morale down 50%. I know now just how convalescent soldiers feel, sitting around a stove in a base hospital. The clouds of ennui which envelope the tents in the garden have rolled in and filled my room. Meanwhile, the peace conference covers itself with a heavy pall of secrecy and doubt, and the stream of visitors runs dry. The worst week since my accident. Mary has talked to me a lot of the laziness and inertia of her soldier patients. They won't bend stiff knees, won't try to hobble with sticks. Obviously, the reason they won't is that every step a wounded man takes sets up a horrid jar, strain, wrench, or ache somewhere. And even if he does stiffen his moral courage and resolve to be excruciated, his energy quickly lands him in a physical prohibition. However hard he works, it is going to take months and months, years and years, perhaps, to get that foot or knee back to real use. And he will be physically depleted the whole time. So why worry? Why not sit by the stove? The only thing that prevents is a certain sort of intelligent determination and the arm of a nurse to lean on. I am luckier than the doughboys in having one usually at hand. Even so, every snail-like progress down the corridor is as difficult as an ascent of the Matterhorn. I thought I was going to be able to do some real work once I was up, but my time is spent in making a stupendous effort, recuperating from it, and beginning again, like the tide on the beach. Only looks to me, on this long grey afternoon, as though I should never reach the fringe of grass at the high edge of the sand. January 10th. I have been walking, call it that, in the garden, assisted by chairs, benches, crutches, sticks, and a nurse. The garden must really have been pretty in pre-war days, with its great trees and its flower beds, its pebbled alleys and rococo embellishments which date back to the time when our hospital was the abode of some mistress of Louis Philippe. But now the damp, floppy, grey-brown tents squat heavily there, like a patient dachshund or a discouraged circus. The alleys are trodden out by hobnails and smeared with mud from the overflowing Seine, and the clustered doughboys have scarcely the spirit to smile. The only cheerful person we met was a very young fellow with a dancing pair of black eyes, dressed in a nondescript American uniform, whom I supposed to be of the AEF, till he spoke to me in French. How did he happen to be here? Mon oncle d'Amérique, my American uncle. The American comrades had taken him in, were clothing him, feeding him, lodging him, giving him cigarettes and chocolate, and the American major was dressing his wounds. Chic, eh? He was jubilant over escaping French army red tape. What would he do when the doughboys left? Time enough to think of that when they really did go. They had been on the point of it so long. Je me débrouillais toujours. I always manage. No mistaking that poilu accent. The hospital might look very pleasant on a bright spring morning, red brick, white trimmings, glass galleries. Under today's lowering sky, the glass revealed only human misery. First we crawled by the diet kitchen, 3 nurses quarreling for possession of the stove, then by the long gallery, Mademoiselle V lying wan with closed eyes. Next we sat down on a bench and looked up at the sun parlor on top of the house, now a Red Cross convalescent ward. 6 or 8 women extended in dejected attitudes, or putting on their stockings. I begged Miss O to take me away from hospital sights. So we tried an unfrequented path at the back of the garden. It was lined with shrubs with shiny green leaves and had that bosky and melancholy charm, that luscious earthly smell which I had breathed at Versailles in winter. The good smell of the earth after so long indoors. But Miss O shivered and thought the high walls that shut us in from the adjoining estate depressing. She's used to 20 degrees below zero, crisp snow, open fences, wide, sunny horizons, and hates these leaden skies, these oozing brick walls and solemn brick houses behind them which look so old and don't always stand 4 square to the street. Cities, she announced definitely, are beautiful in proportion as they are new, and geometrical in pattern, and, preferably, built of wood. The wall makes me rebellious. I want to get out, since I have seen it. We painfully made the circuit by the nurses' home, past the glass-walled reception room, full of rows and rows of YMCA, ARC, and KFC, of both sexes, waiting to consult the doctors. My companion grew, unconsciously, more shivering, bored, and depressed every inch of the way. It is no wonder. She is engaged to a farmer in Dakota. Her letters come very irregularly, and the Red Cross holds out no hope of a speedy release. The rumors from the peace conference are disturbing. I think of it now as a sort of vast, unwieldy ferry boat which is trying to make the crossing from one shore to another. The hawsers will not be actually cast off till the 18th. But the pilot is getting up steam, and the bark has begun to heave uneasily. The waves it stirs up are, however, rather spent before they reach the shores of Neuilly. It is not to be supposed that I can get much light from Miss O on Bolshevism, or from Mademoiselle V on self-determination. I asked the hospital house painter, a smiling, chubby old fellow dressed in a white smock, whom the nurses called Pigeon Blanc, White Dove, what he thought about indemnities. Un tout de bêtises. Tout ça. La guerre est finie. Travaillons. What a bunch of nonsense. The war is over. Time to work. Friends in Paris continue wonderfully kind about taking the long journey to Neuilly. In the last 2 days, visits from F.T., Walter Lippmann, and Pierre Ramp, all of whom I, of course, interrogated on the conference. F.T. quietly said that outsiders can know nothing, that no opinion is possible. Pierre Ramp scratched his black head and spoke a pungent word against Clemenceau and the imperialists. But since he has been to the Lille region and seen with his ferreting eyes the destruction wrought by the Germans in the factory he knows so well, his passion for industrial recuperation more than ever dominates the rest. W.L. looks more harassed every time he comes. He now almost despairs of a victory of Wilsonianism against special interests and imperialists. He says France wants it both ways, wants to guard her frontiers heavily and make a defensive alliance against Germany, and yet wants the League of Nations, without accepting its implications of common trust and good faith. "How I envy you your detachment," he suddenly burst out. "There," spoke the editor. "The only type of young American in my experience who longs to go back to his old job is the writer who has been muzzled by the censor, or precipitated into a life of action by the war. His stored reflections are beginning to choke him. W.L. can't wait to get home, out of uniform, back to the NR office. When he talked of the office, his face began to change, and by the time he had taken some snapshots of his wife out of his pocket, it was shining. Like Ernest, he has the best thing America, or indeed the world, produces in the way of a marriage. His wife is a lovely young contemporary who backs him, and is backed, in a destiny of freedom. Those are the marriages that stand the separations of the AEF, as the thousands of others one could point to do not. But I shall be glad when the various pairs in which I take an interest are reunited, even though WL's impending departure again makes me feel like the one fixed point in a firmament that is shifting its stars like an August sky.